So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. My name is Amy Allocco. I am the co-coordinator of the Women Scholars Network, along with Milda, who will introduce herself in a moment. I teach at Elon University in North Carolina, the eastern seaboard of the United States. And I am a specialist in South Asian religions who primarily works on Hinduism in South India as an anthropologist of religion. And we're so happy to have all of you here. Milda, would you like to say a word?
Hello, welcome to all of you. It's really nice to see you again here. My name is Milda Ališauskienė. I'm from Lithuania, from Northern Europe, and I teach sociology of religion at University, Vytautas Magnus University. I'm doing research of new religions and religion and politics in contemporary society. And it is really a pleasure for me to co-coordinate Women Scholars Network together with Amy. And once again, welcome. And I hope we will have a nice time together and interesting discussion.
Thanks, Milda. So this is the third webinar that the Women Scholars Network of the International Association of the History of Religions has sponsored. And we're really happy to have all of you here. We would love it if you would introduce yourself in the chat by saying your name and the institution and country where you're coming from, and also to add your email address there. And then we can save that and be able to directly email you about future webinars. And we'll announce at the end our upcoming webinar, which will not happen until January. And Kathy Wessinger will give us some details about that at the end. So welcome to you all. I just wanted to acknowledge the support and also the presence of Satoko Fujiwara, who is the Secretary General of the IAHR. She's also an astounding and admirable women scholar, and we're really happy to have her here. So Satoko has been doing the posting of these recorded webinars to the IAHR website, and we're really grateful for that technical assistance. So I want to go ahead and acknowledge and introduce our presenters, and I'll do that quickly by sharing my screen. And then each of them will present about some prearranged questions, and you can use the chat at any time to pose questions to the presenters. And after they get through introducing themselves and their pathways and their backgrounds and their current research projects, we'll open it up to your questions at that time. We expect to conclude in 1 hour's time. Oops. Okay. So welcome, and we will begin. So the first scholar who I'd like to introduce is Corinne Dempsey, going in alphabetical order, who teaches at Nazareth College in New York, here in the United States. Dr. Dempsey is an anthropologist who specializes in Hindu traditions and global Christianity, as well as gender and politics and religion and mysticism. And she has been a peripatetic scholar who's worked all over the world. Her earliest work was on Hindu and Christian practices in India and resulted in a book called Kerala Christian Sainthood. She worked on a Hindu goddess temple in the United States and wrote a book called The Goddess Lives in Upstate New York. She's worked on spirit practices in Iceland and produced a book called Bridges Between Worlds. And she also has a comparative project titled Bringing the Sacred Down to Earth. And I won't tell you anything about her current project, which really does bridge worlds, and she can talk to us about that a little bit when she presents. So our second presenter is Professor Oyeronke Olademo from the University of Ilorin in Nigeria. Her areas of specialization are the history of religions and African religions. She works also on women in religion and peace and security, and religion and environment. And she has a book with SUNY Press, Women in the Yoruba Religious Sphere, and she's published a number of articles on traditional healers, alternative medicine, gender and African religious traditions, and this is just a selection of the topics that her publications have covered. And she serves on the steering committee of the Women Scholars Network. So welcome, Ronki. Our third presenter will be Professor Momo Thant from the University of Yangon in Myanmar. And Professor Momo specializes as a historian in social history and religion in Myanmar, and her many publications are centered in that area in particular. She writes about women and religion, and some of her topics of her research articles include polyliterature, Hindu ethnic groups, and Myanmar women's achievements in Buddhist religious endeavors. And she also serves on the steering committee of the WSN. So welcome, Momo. We're so happy to have you. Our fourth presenter, Professor Shahnaz Hussain Jahan, who teaches at ULab, the University of Liberal Arts in Dhaka in Bangladesh, is unfortunately not able to join us because of a death in her family and a hospitalization in her family. But Shahnaz is an archaeologist, and many of you know her as the leader of the Bangladeshi Society for the Study of Culture and Religion, which is an IAHR organization. So we're sorry that she could not be with us today, but we wish her family all good things. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Professor Dempsey to kick us off. Professor Dempsey, please take it away.
All right, thank you, Amy. This is just so much fun to be in the midst of, oh, there's the sun again, of people from all over the world, all these women who are scholars that sharing so many things, I think, in our lives in so many ways, yet so disparate. So Amy's asked me to just spend 5 minutes talking about my academic and personal path to becoming a scholar of religion, and also then, as she mentioned, an overview of my research interests, which you've just done, and then spotlight on my current project. So yeah, it's really hard when people ask, you know, what got you into the study of religion? It takes a while to answer because it's so circuitous. I grew up in California. It just kind of has something to do with it. In a Catholic family and Irish ancestry and relatives, but you know, I'm American, certainly. And very kind of left of center, a lot of like, you know, in California, we are more syncretic, I think, in our religion. And so my mom was into meditation. So I've always been kind of religion friendly. I began with a BA and it was a counseling degree that I found to be kind of difficult because I worked at a crisis center and people were having crises and it was hard. and I just felt like I needed more than just an intellectual solution. So I ended up going to the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley and starting a degree in pastoral counseling, thinking that maybe that would add to my toolbox of things, but immediately got interested in systematic theology and political theologies, Marxist theologies, liberation theologies. And that's where I ended up and finished my MA with a thesis on the Virgin Mary as a feminist and liberationist sort of model, and ended up from that MA going to Syracuse University to get my religion degree, interested in female divine figures like Mary is, and ended up, because of my background in theology, combining that with South Asian religions, ended up going to Kerala in South India, where there's a real interesting collection of religions, mostly ancient Christianity, Hinduism, and Islam. And I went as an ethnographer to different shrines, and one in particular of a woman who's has been made a saint, but Hindus go to her shrine as well. So I talked to pilgrims, looked at folklore, was hoping to find threads of sort of political stories, folklore that was kind of rebellious, but actually I didn't find that at all. She ended up being someone who suffered very well, and she was powerful. And I've learned a lot at that shrine, that what was important was power for healing. And then went into, as lined up by Amy, my next project was at home with a Hindu temple run by a priest who's not a Brahmin and had women doing the rituals. And so there I found my sort of connection with political theologies with this Hindu priest. And I'll explain my circuity later. That goes with this question that Amy's asking us later. I wrote then a comparative book that got me connected to Iceland, and ended up writing a book on Iceland and their spirit traditions, which is fascinating. And I think important to write about, because so much of what they do in terms of trance, it's like possession sort of practices and healing. Those kinds of practices typically are studied in other parts of the world outside Europe. So I think they're really important to look at. These are folks who are, if you're reading it from the US and you're a Euro-American, you can identify with these people very closely. And then that creates a bridge for understanding cultures outside the sort of hegemonic European American perspective. So that's been a kind of a game changer for me, learning from them. Okay, so my current project is to speak to women who are over the ages of 80. And I've been going to, because of my connections that I have, and this began in 1994. That's when I started my dissertation research. So between 1994 and now, I have all sorts of wonderful connections in India and Iceland. My mother is in California, and she's 91. And also the Sisters of St. Joseph here in Rochester. So those 4 groups of women I've been interviewing, and I've interviewed 134 interviews with 91 women, so some repeats. And I'm now really kind of at the point where I'm able to step back and see the framework of what I'm finding. And what I'm doing, the point of this, is to think through the lens of these women around the world who are older, and who are women, sort of revisiting the category of religion. And the kinds of questions I'm asking them have to do with, and these are women who represent a whole array of backgrounds, some very, very traditionally religious, some very staunch atheists, and a lot in between. So religion as a category is something I'm playing with. And the things I ask them have to do with what really matters in their lives. What are the memories that stick? When you're over 80, what are you remembering? Issues of the wondrous, which I find to be fascinating across these different cultures and religious views. So basically, just very briefly, and I just want to say also an advantage I've found to talking to older women is that there's no question as to why do you want to talk to me? It's like, oh yeah, okay, let's sit down and talk about what's really important, and they welcome it. So this process has been such an honor. And I think, we can't categorize old age as a thing, like, oh, they are this way. It's just too much diversity. But what you can say is when you are looking after a long life into death soon, things snap into focus. So I'm finding the process just really gratifying. So very briefly, I will be talking about how landscapes inform religiosity. In Iceland, they're not very religious at all, but the landscape itself is powerful and informs their way of approaching the wondrous. In Kerala, India, it's much more traditionally religious. And you can see that in the landscape everywhere, and it's a very different sort of way of being religious. In California, they're all transplants, and so their religion is also something that all of them have stories of leaving their original religion, all of them, except for maybe 2 of the 20. So they're transplants in more than one way. And the Sisters of St. Joseph are not. They're all from Western New York. They all have stayed there, but all of them tell stories about how when they decided to join the convent, it was a revolutionary act, which is not what I expected. Their parents were absolutely flattened that their daughter would be nuns. It's just not what I expected. So they're strong women in their own, very much in their own right. And then I talk about, and so 3 sections, that's the first. Second section is what really matters, is a way of looking at what religion is. And there's a few theorists that talk about religion as what really matters. And you can get at that in a lot of different ways. One of which is, what is the role of religion? But the other is, what is, stories of love and loss are interwoven. Deep love is deepened by stories of loss. And I see this all throughout. It's really poignant, and I think something worth thinking about. And also I asked them, what have you learned in life? And so many people talk about learning basically that everything passes. Very sort of this Buddhist anicca. And then also everything, there is something that remains, it's bodhicitta. There's something that they believe in, and it doesn't have to be traditionally religious. It could be nature, the power of nature. It could be the goodness in humanity. There's some really wonderful juxtapositions. And then the final section is, I'm calling it the great beneath and beyond, which has to do with the more in religion. And so there's three ways I'm doing that. One is to look at death and nature as a portal into the more. And a lot of the women talk about experiences and understandings of death and nature that bring them there to this place of the more. The second is more traditional, Robert Orsi's real presence sort of categories, angels, deities, spirits, and saints, and lots of stories about that and how that works and what they mean and significance. And then the final chapter is my favorite, which I call, instead of, it's kind of follows from Orsi, and I call it frameless presence. And these are stories that everyone has, a quarter of the women have told me, talked to me about, except for only one woman in India. So this is outside India for the most part. And this is stories usually that happen when the women were in their early teens, not always, but that's the most common, when they come to this place of deep connection or beauty, and they can't even find words for it, and they say it lasts for maybe 6 seconds. And when they tell me about this experience, a lot of them start crying. And here they are, 80 something, and that is an experience that they pull out. And I don't even ask them the question, have you had, something like this? It comes out at some point. And I find that really, really fascinating and interesting to think about. So there I am. That's my story. I'll stick with it.
Thank you so much, Professor Dempsey. There's a lot there, and we can discuss some of those themes that I think we'll see also in Professor Momo Thant's presentation, and also Professor Oyeronke Olademo's. So we'll move now to Oyeronke, and again, it would be wonderful to hear about those same topics, your academic and your personal path to becoming a scholar of religion, as well as an overview of your research interests and your current project, what you're working on now. So welcome, Professor Olademo. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you well.
All right. First, let me say that I'm delighted to be here. It's a very rare opportunity. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share some part of my journey with sisters. For me, becoming a scholar of religious studies came naturally. What do I mean by that? Religious studies was my best subject in class, from primary to secondary. I never failed the subject. In fact, I led the class many times in the subject. So for me, it was a natural. But this does not mean that I didn't have challenges. I started off as a scholar of New Testament, and so I had to study Greek, classical Greek. I didn't find that very funny. But with time, I got a grasp of it, and that's how the journey started. An interesting part of that journey is the fact that for many years, I was the only female in that field. I only had male colleagues. And rather than being a minus, that was a plus for me because it meant that everybody had a competition to take care of me. I eventually had other sisters join me in the department. I must also mention the fact that I lecture in the same department where I graduated. So I was a student, and with time I became a colleague to my teachers. So many times I had an overlap in the relationship, my superiors, my seniors, but also my mentors. And I say that really helped me. However, my area of interest and area of research has been on women in religion, feminism. That was a tension point between me and my colleagues, who were all men. Took some time, bring them on board to understand that there was the need to look at feminism. There was the need to unpack it. And eventually, some conviction was done. They were able to see the point, and we were able to work together. I got valuable feedbacks from seminar papers, conference papers that were presented. So right now, I have other female lecturers who are colleagues and who are working in the same area. My current research, right now I'm working on a book manuscript for State of New York Press. It's part of a series looking at women in world religions. So we have women in Christianity, women in that, women. I'm working on women in Yoruba religion. Been working very closely with Catherine, and it's been very interesting. I've also been doing some work concerning, on the book manuscript. The major thesis of the book is that women have agency in Yoruba religion, and primarily they get this agency from their culture. The culture encourages female leadership in different guises. And so Yoruba women tap into this cultural heritage, whether they are in Islam or Christianity. And in the process of doing this, they've been able to negotiate power even in patriarchal traditions. So this is the summary, the thesis of the book. So I look at the way that they tap into the cultural heritage. I also look at the way that they utilize this in Christianity and in Islam. I also look at the practice of Yoruba religion in the diaspora and how these have changed the outlook of the religion and how the presence of the religion in the diaspora has changed the religious landscape in the diaspora. For example, we have instances of clashes of some practice of Yoruba religion in the diaspora with the law that has resulted in court cases and how these have been resolved. We also note the prevalence of women-headed households in the diaspora and how these have influenced the practice of Yoruba religion in the diaspora. So these are some of the angles that the manuscripts try to analyze. In addition to this, I've recently been working on issue of sexual violence in the COVID-19 era in Nigeria. Now you recall that COVID-19 necessitated the lockdown, and so the contraction of space. People who will normally leave home in the morning and come back at night are compelled to stay together throughout the day, nowhere to go. This has influenced one way or the other the issue of sexual violence. But the interesting thing for me is the aspect of religion and religious spaces. Some of this sexual violence occurred in the churches. Some of this religious violence occurred with ladies who were fully dressed in hijab. This is definitely a departure from the known landscape concerning women and religion. In Islam, for example, somebody in hijab we will regard as being properly dressed, maintaining chastity. But yet, during COVID-19, we witnessed some of these people being raped and killed. There was the case of a lady who went into the church to study because the place was quiet. She was raped and killed in the church. This is a clear departure from the landscape that we are used to concerning women and religion. Beyond that, I've also been engaged with African feminism. There was a webinar by the University of Nairobi on African feminism and God. I presented a paper there. The gist of that paper is just to look at the resources in African ethos that has been transported into Christianity, in the practice of Christianity, and how this supports the fact that God is God of male and female. So is termed as a bridge between religions, Christianity and African religion. I was also involved with a webinar by a foundation on issues of corruption in Nigeria. So these are some of the things that I have been engaged in. I thank you for your attention.
So some really rich threads there, as well as some very challenging material. So thank you so much, Professor Olademo. I'll now ask Momo Thant if she will also address these questions and give us her insights. Anyone is very welcome to put questions in the chat during the presentations. Otherwise, we'll just kick it off with people asking questions at the end. Welcome, Professor Momo.
Yeah, hello everyone. So greeting from the Myanmar. First of all, I'm very much appreciate your hearing from my colleagues' experience in the academic parts. But maybe my experience on the academy is a little bit strange from my colleagues because of the the Myanmar is the third country and developing country, so the physical infrastructure and the academic level is not the same with my colleagues. So let me start my personal part on the academic. First of all, I got the PhD degree with the dissertation of the history of the Shuchen Nikaya. So the Shuchen Nikaya is the monk sects. So there are 9 Tanga sects in Myanmar. In the one of the Tanga sects, I did the research. And so the Shuchen Nikaya, it's strictly the monks from the Shuchen Nikaya. They are strictly observe the Tanga rules and discipline. So the Myanmar people recognize their name as the reformists because the standing position and activities should depict the origin of the Buddhist doctrine. So why I choose this topic on my research, and I have some reason. One, I was born in Mandalay, and Mandalay was the last capital of the Myanmar king, and the Myanmar in the Mandalay had the depicted as in Buddhism prosper like the sun and the moon shiny day and night. That this made me do research on. So I'm interested in belief and the practice of the Buddhism people of the Mandalay and their acceptance of on Buddhism teaching and what are their role of the Thangka in the preservation and promoting the Buddhism in that time. So after finishing my PhD degree, I continued to do research on religion. It was another Buddhist sect, Thangka Nikaya. In this research, I also focused on how and why the emergence of the new Thangka sect in Myanmar. So another research was the Thangka history in Myanmar. It was published in the senior chat. So in this research, I was looking at what were the respective key, how is the effort in purify and propagate of Buddhism. And in this paper, I examined why the Buddhism under king was flourished because the king support the Thangka. That the king worked both in Buddhist and in non-Buddhist context. So as soon as I got the degree, I had a chance to do research at comparative religion department in Bonn University. So there I did the research and I engaged with the comparative religion. So I did the research on the Pona of Mandalay. The Pona is the Brahmin Hindu ethnic and is a minority group in Myanmar. And I look at the historical and their socio-economic background. And they have lived in Myanmar since the 18th century. So now they lived in Myanmar now, and I think the 10 generations. I pointed out the influence of the economic progress and the education developments affect somehow a great change in socio-land of the Pona. So I highlight some traditional way of lifestyle disappear and how they are able to overcome these drastic changes of political, socio-economic circumstances in the past. So that this Pona research is after the engaging to the comparative religion I have done. So related to another comparative religion research, I did research on the Indian diaspora in Myanmar. So in this paper, I examined the socio-religious belief and how they are standing in difficulty situation and how they learn their religious practice and procedure change and some are fade away. So I'm very interested on this, the Indian diaspora in Myanmar. So my research interests went to the women and religion. When I was a member of the Myanmar National Committee for the Women Affairs in 2005. So I wrote the article of the Myanmar women's achievement in Buddhist religious endeavor. That paper was presented at the SSE as a conference. In the course of the Myanmar history, the position of Myanmar women has always been described one of the outstanding features of the Myanmar society. This paper focused on Myanmar women had been and practicing and participant as much as they are brethren in the endeavor for the prosperity and promoting of the Buddhism. So these women, so we noticed that the women had taken the leadership role in the religious association. So my paper is a references to the empowerment of the women in Myanmar. Fortunately, as a research fellowship, I studied at the Gender Study Department in Central European University in 2007. So that while I was in the CEU, I did the research, the changing social and religious role of the Buddhist nuns in Myanmar, the case study on the 2 nunneries. So it is focused on the Buddhist nun and activities have to extend it and change for the social work because of the Myanmar, because of the democratization process of the Myanmar, give the opportunity to open the new path. So in my paper, I discussed there's a social activity conducted by nuns in Myanmar has a similar function as now is very popular in Myanmar known as the NGO works. Without taking any assistance from the government, with the individual support, nuns they serve the welfare of the poor and the underprivileged people to take care in the bordering system and to teach the modern education. So my research interests mainly on the three areas. One is the propagation and promoting Buddhism and the belief and practice of the Hindu ethnic groups and women participation on social and religious sector. So my long research plan has a review on the Mahawanta, that great chronicle of the Sri Lanka, that the how influence on Myanmar history and people, because of the Mahawanta was a good example of one best to foster and write the Myanmar chronicle. So that I edited the William Keikel translation and Myanmar monks detailed as their translation, so that a comparison between these two chronicles. So my future research is Indian diaspora in Myanmar, assimilation and integration. So, the Indian diaspora had made their presence felt in phenomenon where in Southeast Asia. So they stay away from their native land, and mainly they have seeking their riches and their good opportunity. So I find that their religious practice has undergone significant transformation in the land. Their religiosity had been affected due to the several reasons, such as for example, the availability of the materials for the ritual and the process of the worship, and then the restriction imposed by the local situation and authorities. So for these the phenomenons and these restrictions, how they overcome the Indian diaspora in Myanmar. That this is my the future research. So in this research, I would like to analyze the impact of the Buddhism in shaping their day-to-day religious practice and behavior. So that is the experience of the academic part. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you so much, Professor Momo. So we've heard from our three presenters at this point, and now I just wanted to throw out one or two questions for them to consider in whatever order they want. So just unmute your mic and chime in with your responses. It's kind of a two-part question that I'm calling, looking around and looking ahead. So we're all challenged, obviously, by the context of COVID. So I wondered what kinds of advice and recommendations you might share with the participants about doing your research and your scholarly work during COVID. And then the second question is about the future for women scholars of religion. What kinds of things would you project and things would you recommend? And we know that these webinars have been especially important for younger scholars whose possibilities for conference presentations and travel for research and networking has been very much constrained by the pandemic and also by shrinking resources in university contexts. So your remarks might be particularly helpful to them. So looking around and looking ahead, any of you should just feel free to unmute and jump in. We're eager to hear what you might have to say.
I can start with just a general overview of my thoughts that are more very quick. Just about the opportunity. I'm just a relentless optimist, and that's partly my world that I'm lucky to inhabit. But I just feel like the two words that came up to me during this COVID time is capture and keep. In the US, and I think everywhere, the pandemic has forced us basically to reassess and to prioritize, what really matters. I think it's also laid bare great suffering and inequities that have always been there, but are now sort of being seen by the general population. And it's also underlined a sense of global and local interdependence. And I think because of what COVID is doing for us, what it's capturing, we can, as scholars of religion, we have a moment to also, I think we have an obligation to work with the ways in which our world is being reordered and what is being laid bare and what's being understood as interconnected, and to work with it in whatever capacity. And clearly, some of you are already doing that. And to keep it, not just capture, but keep. My worry is that we are learning so much right now, and it's horrible and frightening. And then the moment will pass, and then our memories are so short. So I think, we have an obligation to work with it and to keep this understanding alive and as a foundational understanding of what really is important, and to move forward. So, this is what just came to my mind when you said COVID. I'm buried in hybrid teaching, so it's not really about research for me right now. And I do know that people who are trying to get out and about are having a really tough time, but maybe someone else can speak more to that.
Okay, I would like to make some comments. I'm aware that some publishers for specified period of time makes their or section of their catalog available for free on net. I'd like to encourage female scholars of religion to make optimal use of such opportunities wherever it comes on. I would like to also encourage that we should exchange information as much as possible. For example, you could post it on the page of the WSN anytime any opportunity pops up. In addition, I would like to advise that during COVID, we should take advantage of learning aspects of other disciplines that oftentimes we do not countenance as scholars of religion. Comes to my mind right now, digital humanities. It's a field that is budding fast, and we could just read and learn the rudiments during COVID. I also encourage young female scholars to sustain interest in the digital world. This is very relevant for female scholars in Africa. The computer, what the computer can do, what you can do with the computer, how the computer can aid your work, how the net can be used, how you can take optimal opportunities on net. I think that if we do this during this COVID time, because you see, normal time, this is another normal, but during the normal time, we are too busy. So I see the COVID as providing us with more than enough time to do that, which we want to do, but we didn't have time to do. And reading is one of them. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say the COVID is a good opportunity for us because of especially the university staff have more time to do research with the things to the COVID. We are more used on in the previous time that we are very busy with the class and the guidance to the students, and now we have a more chance to online, to engage to the online. So the webinar, Zoom, so that I think the technology also, the Myanmar student and Myanmar staff are more engaged and their knowledge are more developed. So now a lot of the webinar or the Zoom, the conference are held, and so we can in person we can travel to around the world, and we can see on all the colleagues and all your knowledge. We can share the knowledge on this conference. This is a good opportunity for the Myanmar people and Myanmar staff, and also the religions. So now we are teaching a religion and studying the religions, and so I think that it is invite to us all the more understanding between the other religion. So that I would say that COVID time is a good opportunity, particularly for Myanmar staff and Myanmar people. So thank you.
It's remarkable to hear optimism is shared not only by Dr. Dempsey, but also by others, as you know, this is a time of possible opportunity. So I don't know, Professor Ronke, if you've seen it yet, but Professor Hackett has put a question in the chat, and I'll just read it out, and you can address it, and then maybe others also want to chime in, because there are some pieces of it which I think are really broadly applicable. So the first part is about the Nigerian situation in particular. So Professor Hackett is asking, how does the land lie now in your department at Ilorin and in Nigeria more generally in terms of the growth of numbers of female colleagues and students? And have you served as an inspirational role model and caused others perhaps to pursue your path? And then she's also asking about the impact of women scholars like you going into university administration. And this, I think, is a more broadly applicable question for many of us. So does that move represent a loss or a boon to scholarship by and on women and religion?
Thank you. Right now in my department, there are 6 female lecturers. I did mention during my presentation, I was the only one for a long time. Interestingly, we never had a shortage of female students. We have our female students in religious studies constitute about 55 or 60% of the class. So it's never been a problem. But the scholars, they are coming up. And yes, I've had some opportunity to be role model to females. In my university, I have served as the chairman of the computer-based test for the university. I have served as the dean of my faculty. I am currently serving as the director for the Center for Peace and Strategic Studies. In addition to that, I have had some opportunities of fellowship. And for example, I was at the Women in Religion program at the Harvard Divinity School, 2000-2001. I've been part of the Salzburg seminar. I've been part of Podestria. And what I try to do each time I have these opportunities is to bring back to the system that which will help the female scholar especially. I mentor young female scholars across countries in Africa. And I can say that the story is changing, the narrative is changing. More female scholars of religion are coming on board. But what gladdens my heart is they are coming on board with less challenges compared to when I started, which is the thing to aspire for. This means that with years to come, those who will come generation after them will have it even easier. And that's the way it should be. Now, for university administration, a couple of months ago, I did apply for a vice chancellor's job. That's the president of the university, though I didn't get the position. But I know that we have females now, not necessarily female scholars of religion, but females in university administration. My university here, we have female deputy vice chancellor, and the registrar of the university is a female. So the vice chancellor of the University of Benin is a female. There are others, but these are the ones I can recall. I think generally we can just say that the narrative is changing, and we hope it will continue to change positively. Thank you.
I wonder if Professor Dempsey or Professor Momo might want to address any part of that question as well.
I can just really quickly just say that this exercise about not just the subject of what we study having to do with women, but the process of our scholarship is how I interpreted your question. And it just occurred to me, and I don't know if this is worth saying, that the reason why my path has been so circuitous has to do with absolutely being a mother and not being able to go back to India with my small children at home because that freaked me out, and staying at home and doing a different project with a temple, and then being a friend of someone who I wanted to spend time with in Iceland. So the comparative project hooked me into Iceland, and being a daughter to my mother who said, why don't you stay home and study old people because we're really interesting. And it strikes me, I think that's kind of a feminist a trajectory because it's all about relationship. So the fact that I've done all these different projects really has to do with relationships. So it's just something that was highlighted to me. And I think that makes me happy. I'm doing it because it's connected to people and to meaning for me. And as a woman, that has made my career absolutely rich. So it's just, maybe helpful for some people to hear that that can work or might work.
I hope you'll write about that in your introduction or someplace, because I think even the example serves to potentially empower people in your reading audience. So we have another question now from Milda. Milda, do you want to ask it on camera?
Yes, I can do that. So thank you all for this kind of optimistic view to COVID, but it seems to me that not all women are benefiting from COVID at all, and particularly women scholars, those who have families and children at home and need to stay at home. And there is this not so optimistic expectation that women actually will lose in this context of COVID. They have less ability to work, less chances, and that men will benefit more. I wonder what are your observations from this side of effects of COVID on women's scholarship?
I just don't want to be the crazy optimist. So I just want to say yes. The Journal of American Academy of Religion, the woman who was the editor, was noting that all the submissions after COVID were by men. So yes, this is true. And we see it in a lot of ways, yeah.
Yeah, I think that there have been several studies already published of trends in journal submissions. So Dr. Andrea Jane, who Dr. Dempsey is referencing here, and I can put that link in the chat, she wrote an open letter saying that there had been a real drop in submissions by women post-COVID, and she drew on 2 other fields that had already mentioned that in economics and in political science. And I think that that gap is deepening and worsening in many places. And it's familiar to many of us, especially those of us who have smaller humans in our care. So I think it's a really important thing to raise, Milda, and to address. I'll just leave a moment in case anyone else wants to mention something in response to that. Okay, so maybe I will take this question from Professor Grignard. She's saying, when I was a student, I had only 1 woman professor in Switzerland teaching courses in my program. Now I work at a faculty of theology and religious studies with 19 professors and 4 are women. She's just started in 2020. And she's commenting that she agrees there might be fewer or different challenges for students today, but there still remain many obstacles, whether these are tied to religious studies and theology as fields, to the university and the academic world, or to society in general. To this regard, sharing international experiences and processes of scholarship is enlightening. So she's thanking all of us for sharing experiences. We can understand better if challenges are tied to our local circumstances or if they relate to international trends or both. And I agree that it's a fantastic comment, and really it's what brings us together here. And it's what makes it valuable to record these webinars so that others can access them. Many people, it doesn't fit with their time zone at the time we've scheduled this, or they have prior commitments. And it's part of why we thought that the webinar series and the prior conveners of the Women Scholars Network, Jenny Berglund and Jay Johnston, really encouraged us to host these webinars, especially during COVID. And Rosalind Hackett, who's one of the founders of the Women Scholars Network, who's on this call, Morning Joy is not here today. They've been very supportive of having these as virtual ways for us to connect and share experiences across contexts. And it's important to us to hear from people from disparate parts of the world, because we're sharing some experiences, but we have disparate challenges and diverse challenges. And so the mentoring, which Ronki brought up in her presentation, is a goal for us going forward. So I want to be aware of the time. It's 8:59 and we have just another moment, but I think that we might have one final question that we'll end with before we move over to Kathy Wessinger for a moment to tell us about our January webinar. So Milda, did you have one question you wanted to ask before we conclude the Q&A portion?
Thank you. I wanted to ask Ronke, because she was telling in her presentation that she also applied for the vice chancellor position in her university. I wonder what reactions did she receive, and were there any outcomes after this application afterwards, and whether that was the first time women was applying for this kind of position. Can you tell us a bit more about this? Thank you.
Sure. Actually, my application was to a university owned by the Anglican Church, which is a private university. I'm an Anglican. I'm also aware that one other female professor applied for that job. I know that the applications were received. I was expecting to be called for interview, but I wasn't invited. And then after the whole process, I made some inquiries by
Microphone is mute.
Ronke, your microphone suddenly became muted.
So I don't have all the information concerning the process, but my findings show that the process was problematic. It didn't follow because there were many grievances expressed by different interest groups. But that was the first time I was applying for that kind of position. And I just applied assuming that the normal will happen. I will be called for interview. If it doesn't go through, I will be told why it didn't go through and things like that. But that never happened. However, it was a good learning experience. And I'm looking forward to many more applications. Thank you.
So, Amy, can I share some experience in Myanmar?
Yeah, so please do, Momo, if you could just give us a brief overview, that would be helpful.
Yeah. So in Myanmar, so a few scholars are interested on doing research on religion because of I had some complaint because there are a lot of the traditional norms, and it is not easy to, they complain that it is not easy to interview with the Buddhist monks, and some consider that religious is an untouchable subject. And some things about the study on religion is boring. So the religion study is only of the monk scholar they consider. But you know actually the academic studying the religion are multidisciplinary approach. But in Myanmar, until now, our university are weak in the multidisciplinary learning approach and research. And for example, we haven't been a sociology department, and the gender study could not start it. So anyway, we can see the new generation scholar efforts. So they are trying to study on the religion and different perspective and different view. So some research emphasized on the Buddhist monks, follow my research, and some highlight on the Buddhism and the king and the state. So there are a lot of the constraints, but we need to overcome these challenges. So I think the one important thing is that they are confused with the teaching about religion and teaching religion. So they are not clear. So the teaching about the religion is to study the religion of the world, the comparative, the factual, and the fair-minded. But some are considered that about teaching the religion, it's a very boring subject, and it's the special for the monks. So this is a very difficult to assess to the new scholars. But now more and more change their mind, and the studying the religion, it's more and more developed. Yes.
Thank you so much to all three of our presenters. You've given us so much to consider today, and we're very grateful to you for your insights and your honesty and your projections as well. I wonder if I could turn it over for a moment to Dr. Kathy Wessinger, who will tell us a little bit about our January webinar. So we'll take a short break for the winter holidays and be back in January.
Thank you very much, Amy. And I also want to say something briefly about women moving into administration and the significance of that before I announce January's session. Is that what I have observed is that it makes a big difference. For instance, at my university, we finally got space for a women's studies center, but we didn't have a budget for many. We just had the space and the committee met there, but there was no budget until there was a woman provost. And then we got the budget. And then also, I remember in an earlier webinar, Rosalind spoke about how she gave the history of the Women's Scholars Network and Women's Scholars or Women's Studies programs in the IAHR. And that really didn't happen until she became president of the IAHR. So for women who go into different positions, administrative types of positions, and the mentoring that they do and the advocacy for women, I think that's really important. So thank you for those of you who do that. And the program that's coming up will be held on January 22nd in 2021. That's a Friday. It's scheduled, the topic is based on the books that have been published so far in the Women in Religion series at NYU Press. And I'm glad that Ronke spoke about her book that is forthcoming. And my students enjoy reading her chapters very much. I think I have about 10 authors, or a total of 10 books forthcoming. 5 have been published so far, or as of December, 5 will be published. So the presenters in the January webinar are the authors whose books have been published, and that's Barbara Ambrose. Her text is Women in Japanese Religions. Rebecca Moore will discuss her book, Women in Christian Traditions. Laura Vance will discuss Women in New Religions. Karma Lekshe Somo will discuss her new textbook, Women in Buddhist Traditions. And I'll discuss my new book, Theory of Women in Religions. And we set the time for 6 p.m. UTC. Because in terms of the authors, they stretch from Hawaii to the East Coast in the United States. So I had to, in order to include all of the authors, that's the time we figured out. And so that will be 7 p.m. in Nigeria and 8 p.m. in Lithuania. And I really apologize to people in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Asia, because that's going to correspond to very early in the morning on Saturday. So what I want to do later in 2021 is to schedule a session, a Zoom session for people in Asia and to interact with these scholars. So these are textbooks, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about the textbooks in the January webinar.
Fantastic. It's really one of our hopes, Milda and mine, that we can highlight scholarship by women scholars. And this seems like a really wonderful first foray. So we're really grateful to you, Professor Wessinger, for organizing this.
Okay,
So our
thank you.
time has come to a close, friends. But I want to just affirm again that Milda and I are very open to your comments and suggestions. So if you have thoughts, if you have ideas that you'd like to see enfranchised in forthcoming webinars or initiatives of the Women Scholars Network, we're very open to them, and we'd be happy for you to contact us via email at any time. Thank you for spending an hour with us, and thanks again to our presenters. We'll sign off here and hope that you have a great day, evening, whatever it is where you are. So thanks again.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.